Hello, everyone. My name is Siva Juturi. I'm Chief Customer Officer for AutomationEdge. AutomationEdge is the leading hyper automation platform serving healthcare and home care industry with its automation solutions, which includes the likes of a conversational solution to integrations to various EMI, HR systems, to a document extraction solution, and many more. So I have an esteemed guest today on our first podcast that we are launching in the healthcare space, Mr. Tim Rowan. Welcome, Tim. Good morning. Tim
Thank
is sitting in a
you.
nice building out in New York, right? So it looks like.
Yeah, it does look like that, but no, I'm actually in Colorado.
There you go. Totally cut off from the concrete jungle that we usually live in. So I'm out of Houston, Texas. Let me give you a quick introduction for Tim. Tim has been in healthcare since early 90s, more than 40 years, I would say. Probably some of the audience is not even born. He's been a CIO for a Colorado agency, has been an industry analyst, reporter, and then eventually he dived into home care and hospice industry, specializing in having thought leadership. And he runs also a home care technology report, a weekly online newsletter since again almost 25 years. He works very closely with the home care agencies. In fact, I believe you visit them in person to understand their cadence, operational challenges, so that you can communicate to the rest of the world, so that we live in a better world, both from serving the population that requires the services and the caregivers who provide that care to the population as well. So it's my honor to welcome Tim again. Thank you, Tim, for joining us in our first podcast. The topic that we picked, which is very much appropriate for Tim's expertise and history and background, is also what I call it as the 3R's or the RRR, which are shaping the home care staffing challenges or home care staffing industry. It's going through a transformation post COVID. And the 3R's that I allude to are recruiting a talent pool from caregivers or staff perspective, to retaining, and then also to reward, to keep them as well as to reward them so that they continue to be motivated to personally as well as professionally to continue to serve the home care industry. So Tim, at the outset, I would like to have you throw some trend, and also you can talk about your experience, the transition that the industry has gone through, especially in the home care and hospice space, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Thank you, Siva. Thanks very much. I have seen a lot in my home care career, which is essentially my second career. I've been in education for a long time, but next month, actually, I don't know when people will be watching this, but November of 23 will mark the 30-year anniversary of being hired into a home health care agency here in
Oh, that's
Colorado.
wonderful. That's
So
wonderful.
I did that for 5 years and then got involved with a leader in the industry, and we put together this newsletter. And the first issue was in February of 99. So my 25th anniversary is coming up soon for that as well. I have seen a lot, as you mentioned, in my 30 years, a lot of change, a lot of evolution in the technology arena. For today's topic, one of the things that I have been hearing for at least a decade is the difficulty that home care agency owners have in acquiring expert staff, or any staff at all in some cases. This is not something new. It was made worse by COVID, but I heard it from agency owners everywhere I went long before 2020. So it's an ongoing problem. And the issue essentially is you need to have enough revenue in order to pay enough to attract your expert caregivers. And there's a limit on what you can charge. Sometimes it's the payer, Medicare, Medicaid, or the patient and family themselves. And other times it's just the economics of competition, where you would like to charge more per hour to a family for their elderly relative, but sometimes you can't, because there's always somebody who might be willing to undercut you by $1 or $2. And so it's tough to keep people on board. So the things that you want to talk about, recruiting and then rewarding for retention, all work together. And there are some new technologies that I have discovered since I've been studying this problem over the last couple of years that we could talk about that attack the problem from different angles. So, if I lay out 5, 6, 7 technologies, maybe one will be right for one agency and another will be right for the other, or maybe pairing a couple of them will be the right way to do it. But it's not just one solution. And I think that's what I'd hope we can talk about today.
Excellent. That's a great starting point here, Tim. And like you're saying right now, the problem has been inherent for some time now, even prior to COVID. And I know you cited some trends also in our conversation that saying that by 2030, the senior population over 65 will double from 49 million to close to 100 million. The over 85 population is going to triple from 6 million to 18 million. But then the reverse trend that's happening is the population between 18 and 64, the available workforce, there is no growth anticipated. So that population will remain stagnant. So that speaks that somehow we have to get the cream from that population, which will essentially not grow over the next decade. We have to have some way to extract that cream to have the growing demand. So let's start with the recruit. Tim, just focus on that a little bit. You have coined the term, which I really like in your articles, called desperation hiring. And you cited the reasons behind like competition or low pays. So can you define the term desperation hiring that agencies actually run into a trap of, and how can we refine that process a little bit better in terms of the whole recruitment process?
Sure. So the 2 studies that I have relied on, one is from PHI Institute, and the other is a joint study by the Mission Care Collective and the National Association for Home Care and Hospice. And both of them have concluded between 2021 and 2030, the industry is going to need about 1 million more caregivers. Wow. And that's not even talking about nurses, just the personal care workforce that is paid for usually out of private insurance or out of the patient's pocket or the family. What's happened because of the shortage, and it's been exacerbated since the pandemic began, is that home care agency owners and the HR department are so desperate to fill a shift, so desperate to have a body to send out to the patient's home that they have tended to lower their standards. And they will hire anybody who can blow up a balloon, which is the comparison that I have used. But here's the problem. If you hire someone who goes through the chain, maybe you find them on Indeed, and you know how Indeed works. People will apply for 30 jobs a day. They don't even remember who you were when you call them. Maybe they'll show up for the interview, and so you've wasted some time and resources there. Maybe they won't show up. Maybe they'll go through the interview and get the job offer and not show up for training. Maybe they'll go through training and orientation and not show up for the first shift. And then the end of the chain is maybe they'll work one shift and disappear. So what an agency has to do is figure out what desperation hiring costs. To do that, you got to start with calculating your total cost of hire. So you got to know the salaries of the personnel that are involved in hiring, whether it's the person who builds your website with the online application, the interviewer, the HR department, the trainers, the people who might go out with a new hire on the first few shifts. All of that goes into your total cost of hire. If a person does not work enough hours to generate enough margin, profit, for you to cover your total cost of hire, then you would have been better off not hiring that person. So the first thing you have to learn is the reason to avoid desperation hiring is it doesn't do any good. It costs, it doesn't gain you any revenue. It's a sunk, lost. So one of the things that I have been teaching home care agencies how to do for the last 2 years is how to identify likely short-term workers, how to save the cost of hiring the wrong person. So you wind up hiring fewer people and winding up with the same number of quality people. So you haven't lost anything. What you've done is eliminated an unnecessary cost. So that's the first step. Under recruiting, my message is stop hiring. I know it sounds but the question, of course, is how do you know who is the wrong person to hire? And that's one of the technologies that I have discovered that I have been teaching people how to use. It's kind of an unusual type of technology. It's a process of elimination. There's a company that offers a simple questionnaire, maybe 5 questions that are tacked onto the end of the application. The instructions are simply to answer with 1 or 2 complete sentences. The algorithm that the answers are put through analyzes not only what the person has said, but how they have said it. It analyzes their word choices and uses a process called cognitive natural language processing. When you administer this questionnaire often enough, the agency can learn what score should be their bottom threshold. So if someone scores a 98, you hire them. If they score a 10, you don't. But they're somewhere in between. You can eventually find the number identifies the likely successful caregiver. And one of the ways to do that is you give the questionnaire to all your existing staff, and you already know who the good ones are. And so you can kind of look for the baseline threshold there. And the people who have been using this have talked about lowering their total cost of hire 20, 30, 40% by just simply hiring fewer people.
That's a great toolkit that an agency can have. So it's not just use of technology, like you're saying, from online recruiting sites to Google's and whatnot, but also using it intuitively where you're able to screen your candidates or caregivers in a much more comprehensive, focused, and creative way so that the responses themselves are driving the behavioral patterns that you would see in the hiring resource, because it's not only skills, both the skills that are required for the job, the tasks on hand, but also the soft skills that you would look for, because the care always has to come with some compassion. So that's very well put. That's something that a lot of agencies are missing out, because I heard that almost 25 to 30% of the hires are straight out of high school. These are kids, and they're still immature. Their brains are still developing. They're going through a lot of hormonal changes. And here you shove them to provide care to these seniors and chronic patients, and they have no clue. They just think that they're just working in McDonald's.
But this assessment works both ways. There are many stories that I've heard about applicant that doesn't look all that good on paper, like perhaps a 19-year-old, but they score high through the algorithm, and so an agency takes a chance on them. The one classic story is the person whose experience was with a Pizza Hut, but the algorithm said, give this person a chance, and a year later, she was the top employee. She was the employee of the year. So it can work both ways. It can tell you who not to hire, and it can tell you who to hire. But at least by using this kind of filter, you get a better chance. I'll give you another example. I worked with an agency out of Florida, I think it was, that reported at the beginning, before starting to use this system, they would find 200 people from Indeed, and they would contact them, and 100 would respond. And maybe 50 would show up for the interview, 25 would be offered a job. After 3 months, there were 8. After all of that expense, the whole HR department, the interviewing, everything, 8 good caregivers for a 4% success rate. So if you can identify those other 50 people that you shouldn't have bothered interviewing, it gives you the same number. You wind up with that same 8 without all of that expense.
And you just rightly said the cost of replacing one caregiver is close to about $3,000. So imagine you're talking about 30, 40 of them that you lose out in the first 90 days. The cost is 3,000 into 40. It's close to more than $150,000 that's gone down the drain for you. Already a low margin business.
Right. Things
So,
like Indeed
yeah,
are excellent for getting you a volume of bodies,
yes,
but you don't want to hire everybody. It doesn't
exactly.
work out.
Yes, absolutely. So going back to your example, right, in terms of finding that caregiver profile and identifying. So the first 90 days of employment are critical. Even after you filtered through your solution and also more innovative ways, they may be very good at performing, but if you don't take good care of them in the first 90 days, they will leave you. There's still, I've heard that 80% turnover for even decent, well-performing caregivers. So what can an agency do in those first 30, 90 days, which are very critical?
When you find a good one, you want to keep them, right?
Yes, yes.
So most people assume that the hourly pay rate is what keeps people on board. And it turns out from the surveys of caregivers that it is one component among many. And sometimes in some surveys, it indicates that the pay rate is not the most important thing to
Mm.
people. Off the top of my head, I don't know how many of the other factors I can list, but I'll give you an example of a caregiver who was consistently late showing up, and the
Yes, yes.
client was getting angry, and the company was about ready to fire her.
Mm.
Instead, they brought her in for an interview and found out that she relied on a babysitter, and the babysitter was often late. So, what they did was they gave her a different client to serve who wanted to start later in the day. And from that point on, she was never late. She became an excellent caregiver. They found someone else who was able to arrive early in the morning. So, accommodating scheduling needs, accommodating family needs, adapting the schedules that you offer and in a variety of ways to the needs of each individual. Sometimes, it might be bearing the expense of an Uber when someone calls in and says, I can't make it, my car has broken down, or my car's in the shop, I can't work for the next week. Those little expenses. I've heard of some agencies that have built a childcare center right in the office. So to be flexible enough to accommodate the needs of what could it be, 8, 10, 50, 100 individuals is a challenging task. But it can be sometimes more important than the hourly pay rate to keeping people on board. We know that most of these personal care workers are signed up with 2, 3, 4 agencies in town.
Yes, yes.
So your job is not just to keep them employed. They'll stay employed. They may not work for you, but they'll stay on your books. The job is to be more attractive than your competitor down the road, to offer them concessions and different kinds of perks that maybe the other one is not offering. You can do parties, you can have
Yes.
employee of the month, you can give out trophies, but when it comes right down to it, the pay rate and feeling appreciated are the things that keep people on board.
You said it so right? That while recognition, I just heard somewhere that recognition, such as free donuts on Fridays, is a nice gesture, but it does little to pay for car repairs, daycare, and grocery daily. So your daycare example was so well said, not only from a cost perspective, but also convenience, because you're enabling and being aware of the caregiver's personal situation. So that's where I think even the technology side, right? If you have to solutionize this problem, there are ways and means to match algorithms where we could capture the preferences much better for a caregiver as part of onboarding process. Not only skills, because we tend to really think, like you said, their bodies with these skills, but also their preferences. So when we capture those preferences in terms of how they want to perceive their operational rhythm for these shifts and for various parameters, you're able to match it to your population that you're serving could be location preference, could be something that's transportation preference that they would like to have, and other things that may add up to their bills. So there are main ways and means to do that. I'm sure, there are tools out there which do that, right from even the home care agency software. I know that one of the agency software like WellSky has some matching toolkit built in. But again, the adoption of those tools is more important sometimes than using it, because then it has to be realistic too, so that you could use them effectively and then you see the results in terms of retention.
Rather than going through a litany of names of technology companies, I should just refer people to my newsletter at HomecareTechReport.com, because I frequently write about recruiting and retention and rewarding, and a number of technology companies that are out there. But there are also interesting research studies. I rely on this one from Mission Care Collective that they did in conjunction with NAC. One of the things that they point out, Brandy Kurtika is the CEO of Mission Care Collective. One of the things that she teaches in her seminars and webinars is there are about 8 different kinds of caregivers, different characteristics. You talked about the teenager. There are college students that want to work part-time, but by and large, most of these workers are single mothers of color. And one of the characteristics that these people have in common is that they tend to live paycheck to paycheck. And so one of the technology that I found from a company called Daily Pay, and there's a couple of others that do the same thing, there is a way that you can give payday advances for any hours that have already been worked. So it's not a loan, but it does give people the option of downloading money into their bank in advance of payday. And what this does, it helps them to avoid late fees for utility bills and rent and car payments and things like that. You offer something like that, and they're not going to leave you. They're going to work for you more often than they're going to work for something else. So that's the kind of technology that supports the reward R of your list of R's. That's one example.
Yeah. So talking about retention and reward, definitely something that these toolkits will help. Now, you did mention about these two bodies that are out there, like National Association of Home Care and Hospice and Home Care Association of America, HCA as well as NAHC. And I know we both are going to be in these events in a couple of weeks. They're going to showcase all kinds of solutions, and there'll be agencies scouting for something that will help on the staffing challenges. Now, the reward piece is something that I was curious to know your thoughts. Tim, where do you think that the gap is today for the agencies to reward? One of the things that agencies are also struggling with is that they are looking at the government bodies also to raise the pay rate. It's still, I think that the average for these caregivers is around $15 or less, if I understand. But the kind of care they give is so rewarding from the service standpoint. So do you think there's something that needs to be done, especially for Medicaid, Medicare, what they offer to the agencies and private pay? How do we make sure that part of the retention and reward is tied to some financial incentives?
One of the aspects of this gets into the political side. There is a philosophy at Medicare, Medicaid, and at many of the Medicare Advantage insurance companies and managed care companies, there's a philosophy that if you lower the cost of home care, you save money. And the national associations have been trying to get through to them for years that when you lower spending on home care, it raises your overall costs. The more there is, the lower your nursing home and hospital bills are.
I see.
And for some reason, CMS has always claimed that their data shows the opposite. The industry data disagrees. I don't know what they're using. I don't know what MedPAC is using, but everyone in home care understands that home care costs about 1/10 of what the hospital stays cost. And the sooner you can get people home from the hospital, the less your overall costs are. So it's counterproductive for a payer to be demanding 3 visits where 7 are necessary, or to be demanding 30 days of care instead of 60 or 70, because the longer lengths of stay keep people out of the hospital and lower overall costs. So that's the first response to the philosophical side of the debate about whether home care costs or pays. But the answer that a lot of people have thought about, I really don't know how many providers have implemented it. The payers are talking about value-based payment, so paying
Right.
for outcomes instead of paying for hours. The provider, the home health or home care agency, could move that philosophy down to the employee, to the nurse, to the caregiver. The better the outcome, the more you get paid. The better the outcome at shorter length of stay, fewer visits, fewer shifts, the better the outcome, the more you get paid. There is a thinking. Nobody's that I know of has devised the formula to
Yep.
make that happen. But once value-based pay comes into play, extending it to rewards for the people who actually make it happen. Oh, it's nice that the ownership gets a bonus for better outcomes, but who's making that bonus happen? It's the nurse and the caregiver. So sending the incentive downstream to the actual worker might help the agency overall to recruit and retain more people. So one
That's
of the
very
other
interesting.
technologies that I found were that affects both recruiting and retention is a piece of software that comes out of a home care agency in Arizona. And I'm hesitant here because they recently changed the name of the product. And so
Sure.
I'm going to have people contact me for more information. But you've probably heard of Amway,
Yes.
where you get paid for adding to your downline, right?
Yeah.
There's a way of rewarding people for recruiting their friends to come to work with you. So a caregiver says, hey, you should come leave your company and work for my company because it's a really great company to work for. So the person who recruits can receive a bonus, maybe an additional, an add-on to their hourly rate. Then it goes down. So the second person recruits a friend and gets that bonus. But the first person now is at 2 generations, right, away from the new hire and gets another bonus, maybe smaller, but another bonus. Well, turns out that gets pretty complicated. And so
Yes.
this
That's what I think
software,
I remember. It's called pyramid scheme.
they call it multi-level marketing.
Multi-level marketing.
It takes some fairly sophisticated software to inform the payroll software exactly how to manage all of this. And that's what this home care agency out of Phoenix, actually Scottsdale, has developed, is software that you can buy from them that will help you to keep track of this bonus system. And the guy who invented it, his agency, they talk about a 67% increase in retention.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, I think these are all very innovative solutions because then you're actually, if you see the impact of this, right, of this incentive program, what it is doing is you are also spreading or distributing the revenue that's coming across the entire workforce in a way so that everybody is reaping the benefits of bringing in somebody to the quality of care through value-based care that may come in sooner than later. It's not there yet, but being ready for it will help everybody in the process. So, Tim, now if you have to look at how the industry is changing from these 3R's perspective, we talked briefly on both retention and rewards and recruitment, but how do you see next 3 to 5 years the industry changing from staffing perspective? Do you think there'll be a trend that will help fill the demand? That's one. And second is also ensure that there is less turnover. Now, the turnover has a different definition, right? One definition is that you are losing talent. The other is that for some reason, there's always some challenges in terms of also the care cycle itself, where you are picking the wrong caregiver to the client or the patient. So there is some efficiency gains that have to happen to make sure, or the whole scheduling challenge that you were talking earlier, that You show up there and nobody's at the door. There is always some turnover, which is unforeseen, and technology and solutions can help that much better. That means that the information has to flow on a more real-time basis between the caregiver to the client and the in-house staff that's coordinating at the back office for the agency. That communication, if it can improve, and the tools that are being using, the channels could be email, smartphones, text, apps, right? That's changing the way we operate. Though the senior population may not be as tech savvy as caregivers and in-house staff is. So do you see that the turnover or the inefficiencies that are there in the system also will change in the next 3 to 5 years, and which will help also these 3 R's in the process?
Well, the very first thing, of course, that you have to keep in mind is that the age level of the 76 million boomers has not peaked yet. The oldest ones are just barely turning, and home health take care of people more often that are 80 and above. So the influx of boomers has not hit in home care as hard yet as it will. And so being prepared for the volume of business, if to put it crudely, the number of people needing your services is going to require having more quality people. And so it's a double-edged sword in a way. The first company I mentioned, called Millimatch, that does the algorithm and the questionnaire, also has a way to match caregivers to patients. It's been very successful for Millimatch in many other industries, but in this, it would require giving the questionnaire to the patient or the family, and it doesn't always work out. So you can try it with Millimatch, but there are other ways to strategically match. A lot of the automation software that you deal with, I know, does things like matching allergies and gender preferences and dogs and cats and distance and things of that sort. You can go further into personality matches. Sometimes it has to be simply trial and error. I wrote an article recently, though, just as a caution, about an agency that was sued by the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission because the patients were asking for particular races of caregivers, and the home care agency was accommodating those requests.
Oh, is that right?
And they got sued for it. So it wasn't the agency that was racist, it was the client, but still the agency for it. So that's something to read up on it and watch out for. So after you think about the number of boomers that are still on their way to the home care age group, if you will, then you have to look at who's going to be taking care of them. Many times it's the family, just by default. When there are not enough caregivers available, the adult daughter 500 miles away will often move in, sometimes work remotely, sometimes quit her job. That's usually who it is the adult daughter. Coordinating with the patient's family, the patient's needs, to form a cooperative relationship with the family members who might be able to provide some care, training the family members. This is something that more and more agencies are beginning to do. The thing to avoid, of course, is burnout. If you are asking people to work 50 hours a week, they love the overtime. If you're asking 80, going to lose them. So it's difficult to find a way to strike a balance, but it's intertwined. Retention begins at recruiting. You recruit you hire the right people, the retention works out better for you. So there's no one answer. There's no one easy answer.
That's great. I like that phrase, retention begins at recruiting. So I think with that sentence, Tim, we have come full circle, right? So we started with recruiting. We talked about rewards, retention, and then you are ending in a very positive note that retention begins at recruiting. So in terms of any final thoughts, Tim, we're going to be obviously meeting up there in the big shows in the next couple of weeks. Look forward to meeting you in person also. I think we have a lot to gain than to offer. So we will see the trends that are coming through. So hopefully all the topics that we talked about, we'll see them in action there, and the technologies that will help, and the patterns. But any final thought on the 3 R's we talked about? And let me say, is there a hope that, because hope begets hope, right? So we have something really positive to look forward to in the near future.
A lot of it has to do with revenue. You want to
Yes.
be able to pay your people enough. So one final
Sure.
thought would be, don't be afraid to play hardball with Medicare Advantage and with
Yes.
managed care organizations.
Yes.
When they have a high school graduate at a desk looking at a manual saying that patient needs 3 visits, argue with them, fight with them, and don't be willing to say no. Sorry, I cannot serve your patient at a loss. I will not serve your client, your covered life, for a loss, and you'll have to go somewhere else, put somebody else out of business. It's hard, but sometimes you just have to do that. So it might not improve your revenue, but it'll reduce your losses anyway. And then the other thing is constant research. Technology is constantly changing.
Yes.
One of the things that I've learned writing this newsletter for 25 years is that 3/4 of what I've written is obsolete.
Yes.
Maybe more than that. Nevertheless, since I went electronic in 05, I've never thrown away a single article. And if people want to go to my website at HomecareTechReport.com, they can use the search function, put in keywords, and they can read about tech companies that are no longer in existence, and they can read about all of the things that I've learned over the years about recruiting and retention and rewarding. And over the last 2 years, I've written about it quite a bit. So even though we don't have time to exhaust everything I know in this session, there's a lot there. And I welcome people to join me on that journey.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim. With that note, again, it's my honor and privilege for have you hosted our first podcast in the home care healthcare space. And we hit the right topic, the RRR, the 3 R's, recruit, retain, and reward. And we look forward, again, the solutions that offer both from technology standpoint as well as the agencies that are grappling on a day-to-day basis operationally with the human workforce that they're dealing with, both the caregivers, the in-house staff, as well as the patients or clients that they're serving. We hope that this session was very useful, and this podcast, obviously, we will publish it soon for the world to know. But again, thank you so much again for coming on to this podcast, Tim. It was a privilege and honor once again. Thank you for your time today.
The honor was all mine. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a great day.